This is Elizabeth McBroom interviewing Mr. Kenneth Rhodes at his home office at 880 Chula Vista, Pasadena on September 25th, 1989. And I had asked you this question, I think, about other interviews that you had been involved with, and you said some, but entirely unrelated.
That's right.
To this.
I had two oral histories, but they were for different
so that
subjects.
The copies of them wouldn't be pertinent to these archives. I see. Okay. Right now, I think we're ready to do business. Now, maybe you could just start, Mr. Rhodes, and tell about how you happened to become a board member and board president of some of the social work agencies here in Southern California.
Well, I've been in practice of the law since 1937, and about 1948, before that, felt that a lawyer should give away some of his time, and for that reason I thought I ought to become involved in some kind of community service. And so I did a little inquiry, and through a good friend of mine who was then serving on the board of Los Angeles Family Service, I started with that agency. And then I think it's fair to say from then on, one thing just led to another. And I went from the Family Service Agency. At that time, Blythe Francis was the executive director, and she retired about 6 years later. And when she retired, she'd been serving as a trustee of a small agency called Special Services for Groups. And that agency was composed mostly of executive directors of other agencies and of the police department and representatives from the state and county. And they felt at that time they should broaden their board and have community people come in. And so when Blythe left the community, I took her place as a trustee of Special Services for Groups. And then,
when was that about?
That was probably about 1954. And as you know, that agency grew out of some of the studies that were made after the Zoot Suit riots, and this was a small agency formed to try to deal with gang activity. And Les Eichelberger was then the executive director of that agency. And then about the time I went off the board at Family Service of Los Angeles, I went on the board, I guess you'd call it a board, of the Family and Adult Service Division of the Welfare Planning Council, and served on that for a number of years. And while I was doing that, I also went on the board of Hathaway Home for Children, and ultimately became president of that board. And then about the time I got through doing that, I became a trustee of the Legal Aid Foundation, ended up being chairman of that board for 2 years. So one thing just led to another.
And it looks as though you always were sought out to become the president of all
After
these boards.
2 years, I think one reason is a lot of people said no, and I was willing to say yes. You know, I wasn't always the first choice, but I was willing.
You were willing. Well, I think that's what every agency needs, is someone willing to step into the leadership and carry the torch.
And let's see, from there, I then also, during this period, ultimately became a member of the United Way Board of Trustees and served on a number of budget committees, and also can't remember the name of the committee, but it was the committee on the United Way that determined priorities among programs. I don't know if they still have it or not, but we took types of service and determined after a good deal of research where they fit in the scale of priority so that United Way would be funding their high priority agency services rather than others. And that was a very interesting activity. And then after the Legal Aid Foundation Board, overlapping, I also went on the board of the Caltech YMCA, which I still do to this day, off and on. And then I was a trustee of the LA County Bar, which took a good deal of time. And also on a local draft board during the Vietnam War period, which I found very difficult kind of a job, or volunteer job. And then I really got into educational institutions and went on became a trustee at Scripps College, which in turn led to I became chairman of that college board, and then of the Claremont University Center and Graduate School Board, and also on the Thatcher board. So I ended up chairman of that board. So, as I said at the beginning, one thing always seemed to lead to another.
You kind of progressed from social agency boards to university college boards.
Yeah. One other thing I might mention, I think while I was involved with United Way, I chaired a special committee that brought about the merger of the Carver Community Center and the Avalon Community Center. These were two.
Down in South Central.
Down in South Central Los Angeles. They were two agencies that were struggling without enough resources. And United Way wanted them to combine. And they were getting a great deal of resistance by both agencies who wanted to keep their identity. And this was a committee that in about a year's time brought about the merger. It was a very interesting committee. And Tom Bradley was then president of one of those agencies.
Interesting. That's a tremendous number and variety of agencies. Is any experience that you had in any of these stand out like a kind of a peak to you that something was really accomplished and was really a very gratifying experience?
Yeah, I think a number of times. I think while I was on the board at Hathaway Home, a lot of the referrals to the agency were county referrals, either from the court system basically, and at that time the county had a formula for reimbursing child care agencies for the cost of providing this service. And it was much too low, and we at Hathaway got together with people from the other children's services agencies and presented some facts to the County Board of Supervisors, and we supported it with some research and succeeded in greatly increasing the amount of public support coming from the county, and that was
you could do the job more adequately then.
Yeah, so very satisfying. Other occasions, which I think have had special meeting on almost all these agencies I ever served on, we had a change of executive director. So I've never counted up, but I've been on an awful lot of search committees, both in social services agencies and in education ones. And I found that a very interesting and rewarding experience, particularly when you find a person who really makes a big difference.
Maybe you tell about some of the people you found and who worked well.
Starting with Family Service of Los Angeles, Blythe Francis retired, and we got Dick Stock, who also has long since retired, but that was the first one. Special Service for Groups, Leslie Eichelberger retired, and we got George Nishinaka, which is rather interesting because he completely, over a period of time, completely changed the type of service the agency was performing.
How did he change it?
Well, when Les Eichelberger was the chairman, the program for the agency was hiring talented social workers to work with gangs, infiltrate them in a sense, and try to point them in a constructive direction. And when George came in, he was more interested in helping agencies, minority agencies, to get funding for programs. So he wasn't working with hard-to-reach gangs at all, but was really providing research and funding information for other agencies that needed a worthwhile service, but completely different. And that was kind of taught me that the executive director of an agency can sometimes, over a period of time, really change the focus of an agency, which happened in this case.
Did you think that he changed it to provide a better service, or?
I think he felt that, I'm putting words in his mouth, I really don't know, but I think he felt he could do more for the community with this type of service. Because working with gangs required a lot of funding, and you could only work with a few gangs, and the problem is so tremendous that I think he felt what we were doing was just a drop in the bucket, and maybe that amount of time could be better utilized with a slightly different kind of service.
He did something to kind of try to multiply the efforts of the agency, or extend them more.
Yeah. But not really agencies just working with gangs so much as with the agencies trying to improve the lot of the minority community.
Mm-hmm. Did it go more to preventive service in some ways then?
Yes, I think so. And then let's see, other peaks. At Hathaway Home, there again I had a search, and Maxine Elliott was a good friend of mine, and the executive director when I first went on the Hathaway board. And she was very good in upgrading that agency and expanding its service, but she did so to a point where it came beyond her administratively. She billed it so well that then she really couldn't control it. And so she left, and Chet Latch then came on as executive director, and about that time we acquired the Mill Ranch out there in the valley, and that agency expanded tremendously and got a lot more public funding that it never had before. And that was kind of a good high point. In the Legal Aid Foundation, when I first went on that, the board was composed of a good many judges and people who had been on the board for a considerable period of time. And this was about the time that the federal legal services program was getting underway, where there was public federal money available to expand legal aid services. And the Legal Aid Foundation board felt that that was wrong to accept any public money, because they felt that meant giving up control, and they weren't willing to do that. So the board for a long time resisted receiving any federal money, to the point where another legal services program was started in Los Angeles with public money, federal funds. So there were then the two agencies. But the new one, once it got underway, ran into trouble, and they had some problems with misappropriation of funds, and so the federal representatives of the federal government came to us. I was then chairman, and wanted us to take over the other agency, which they'd be willing to have us do on certain conditions. And some of those conditions were changing the executive director of the agency, bringing more minority people on the board, this kind of thing, which we agreed to finally, but there were some tough sessions on getting the board to go along with this, but we finally did, and that was when Mr. Hankey and Ed, I can't think of his name at the moment, they stayed with the agency, but were no longer in charge of the direction, and we got a very talented black administrator who later became the Superior Court judge, the executive director, and the program expanded and has been very strong ever since. So that was a nice...
do you think that this has continued to be an issue about the one you identified about the acceptance of federal funds? And
I don't think so.
That's been really resolved, you think, and there hasn't been a problem of loss of control by the agency?
I don't think so. Let's see what else. Well, the Avalon Carver Committee was kind of a high point, too, to be able to convince two groups who were absolutely resistant to change to go along with it. And it was kind of interesting the way, this was a very good committee. Tom Bradley was on it, Anita Army, and a number of other people who had a lot of agency experience. And we started out in a very low-key way of just comparing the bylaws of the two agencies. And at the first meeting, we reviewed that, and neither side wanted to adopt the bylaws of the other. So we drafted a new set pattern on both of them and got them to agree to that bit by bit. And so we got, at the start, we took the easy way out and got them to agree on bylaws. And then the toughest one was the choice of the executive director who would be, and they both had their executive directors, and we decided to have a search with nobody to know the actual names of the applicants, but just the qualifications, although sometimes you could guess who was
They had a
who.
pretty good clue.
But anyway, we went that route and selected one, and we finally put the thing together. And one thing that we argued a good deal about was what to name the combined agency. And I said I didn't want to spend any time on that because Betty and I had enough trouble naming our own children to get two people to agree. And I said, you can do that after you're merged, but until you agree on a different name, I suggest you call it the Avalon-Carver Community Center, and it's still that today.
It's still Avalon Carver. Avalon-Carver. Well, you've had a lot of differences to settle and negotiate and arbitrate, it sounds like. Do you like that aspect?
Yes.
Yes.
I really,
a great deal of skill in it, obviously.
What I really like conducting board meetings, and I think the process can be very constructive. I think the chairman's job is really to protect other board members' time, and so that you don't have someone who repeats what's already been said. You kind of ventilate an issue and move it to some kind of consensus, and I think that's very challenging.
Tell something about how you did that.
Well, I think one thing you can do is be aware who wants to talk, and indicate from the chair that they'll be next, so that you're not going to neglect them. And then if somebody goes on too long, you can say, well, I think you've made your point, and we want to get as many points of view as we can. Why don't we hold what you said here and let somebody else have a chance? Then if you want, you can come in at the end. And then after there's been a bit of discussion, you can say, well, I think we've really discussed this pretty fully, and are you ready for a vote? And if anybody has anything more to say, it should be now. And you kind of move it along. Or if someone comes in late to the meeting, that was one of my favorite approaches, which wasn't original with me. I'd seen other people do it. But you've been discussing something, and you've really kind of moved it along, and you can say, Mrs. Jones, sorry that you've just come in, you've missed some of the discussion, just let me bring you up to date where I think we are. These are the points we've discussed, and these are the things in favor and opposed, and I think we're about to reach a consensus of such and such, and you can push the whole discussion ahead.
Not only Mrs. Jones, but everyone in the room hears that.
Everybody else in the room hears that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Have you ever given any seminars on board leadership and this kind of thing?
No.
Sounds like you should have.
Well,
You have this pretty well thought through and formulated.
well, it's wonderful. And you get a lot of people who are there because they're interested and with different ideas. I think the board process can be usually very constructive unless you have someone who really wants to talk too much.
What do you see as the function of a board in relation to social agency?
Well, I think to set policy, really. Set policy and be sure that the program is a high-quality program and that the finances, you've got adequate support, or if you don't, where you have to cut, this kind of thing. I think there's always a different area, a difficult line to draw to me between what's administration and what's board. And it's awfully easy to get over the line and try to...
Would you say this was a problem or a problem for some board members?
I think more in the educational situation than in a social agency. Because in education, very often, some of the... I'm sorry about that phone. Some of the trustees have children in school, particularly at the lower level.
Mm-hmm.
They get involved with faculty, and if you have trouble with some faculty that are either too strict, the trustee can try to get involved in what I would say a purely administrative job. The superintendent or the principal hires and fires and deals with faculty. It's not a trustee responsibility. But very often you can see some of that happening.
Have you distilled anything out about how a board can recognize and observe that fine line between administration and policy?
Well, sometimes we talk about it, you know, this is an interesting problem, but this isn't our responsibility. But I'm sure the executive director would be interested in what we have to say, but we've got to realize that it's his or her decision.
Do you know?
I think that's the chair's responsibility.
Yeah, do you know of boards who have departed from that and run into trouble with?
I don't think so.
You think they pretty well stick to policy in your observation?
Also raising money.
Can you tell about some of the obstacles that you've encountered as a board leader?
I don't really know. I guess, I don't know if this comes within the category of obstacle, but one of the things I feel very strongly about is that if you're a trustee of an organization, you're also not only overseeing its quality, you know, that it's run with integrity, but you're a protector of its reputation. And I've belonged to organizations where rumors become rife about either program or personalities that are absolutely false. And I think, in a way, that's an obstacle to the successful operation of the agency. And I always try to deal with that immediately.
Deal immediately.
Immediately.
Come right to grips with it. Bring it out in the open.
An illustration of this, and it's not a social work agency, but an educational institution, where rumors were rife that the headmaster had a drinking problem. Absolutely false. And how it was started or why it was started, I'll never know. But in various cities, the reports kept coming back. He has a drinking problem. So I went directly to the headmaster and told him. And I said, you know, we just can't have this kind of rumors going around. We've got to deal with it right now. And I want to come up to the school, and I want to talk to your head 5 faculty people, your deans and your head people, without you being present. And I set it up for the next day, and I went up there and satisfied myself that there just wasn't a shred of truth in any way in this rumor. Then I got on the phone and called there were 26 trustees. I called every trustee on the phone, told them what the rumors were, what I'd done, that it was absolutely false. And our responsibility as trustees was to spike the rumor whenever it came up, without any question. We looked into it, it's false, let's move on. And that kind of thing, I think, is very important. That's where a chairman
No more rumors.
can really do a service to an agency. Other obstacles, I guess, would be financial. There's never enough money to do what you want to do.
And how did you deal with that?
You try to raise it, or be more persuasive with United Way, or whatever you can do.
Mr. Rhodes, have you been identified with any, large-scale social movements in your role as the board president? Not really. I think the answer to that would be no. I have, when I was with Family Service, we belonged to the National Family Service Association, and I spoke for them a number of times, but, that's not a national, well, you could call it a national movement in a way. But I think no. I think the answer is no. Did you see this National Association achieving its goals? Did it seem to you effective in what it was doing?
I think so. I think so. We went to them for advice from time to time, and I guess the answer is yes.
What changes do you see in the social scene now from the time you were...
Oh, I think in this community, the community's changed. So, we're a multi-racial society now, and there's a whole lot of new programs that are needed when you think of things like the drug problem and AIDS, things that we didn't know anything about. And I think different racial, ethnic groups want their own services, in a sense, their own family counseling. So that there's a need for a lot more services is one big change. And then there must be a bigger drain on sources of funding.
Would you think that's sound for any given ethnic group to have its own service agency?
I think it would be better not, but in terms of, I'm not close enough to these different communities. I have a sense that some of them might feel more comfortably working with somebody of their own ethnic group than with somebody else. But I think it would be better to just have one myself.
Would lead to a lot of proliferation, certainly.
Duplication.
Did you see during your time much change in staff composition as far as ethnic representation?
I think there's been a gradual increase having minority staff. Some very good people too. And I think particularly recently, really since I've been involved.
Have you known minority workers or executives that you saw as making a particular contribution?
Yes, Charles Jones, the legal aid, I couldn't think of his name. He was black, and he made a great contribution to the Legal Aid Foundation while he was the executive director. He then became a Superior Court judge. Mm-hmm. But one of the, I didn't tell you, but one of the big problems when we were searching for a new executive director was the Mexican-American community wanted a Mexican-American as the executive director. And they were unwilling to vote for someone who was black. And we finally elected a black executive director, but it was a hard struggle.
How did you bring it off?
Oh, I think in a way, at one point I heard the chairman who succeeded me say, "We're not using Robert's Rules of Order." But it came about and everybody was happy.
You got a good person, and even those who wanted one of their own group accepted and were happy with him. Do you think of some strategies like this that work that you think would be useful as a guide to other people in the field now?
Oh, I really can't. I think the process would be much the same of trying to put on a thorough search and a fair one. And when it comes to a problem like we had at the Legal Aid Foundation, sometimes I just don't know how you deal with that.
Mm-hmm. You were involved with executive searches over quite a span of years. Did you notice a difference in the quality of applicants that were available?
Oh, fortunately, we always had some enough good applicants to make it viable. Maybe in this day and age there might be more. At the college level, I think it might. For a while, it was very difficult if you were looking for a woman to find a woman who wasn't already spoken for some other job. I think it's easier now.
Mm-hmm. The supply of able women has increased.
And there's greater visibility than they had before.
No, there are agencies now who just are devoted to executive search. Do you think that, did we comment on that?
That's very helpful.
It's helpful.
It's very helpful. We've used them a number of times. And at the educational level, the search committee did most of the work, but the professional search people were helpful in citing this information, suggesting names, and also checking up on people we were interested in, so that it can be very helpful and I think shorten the process. It's expensive, it costs money, but it's worth it.
Do you think it's agency funds well spent to subscribe to such a service?
But it may vary on how much you want the service to do. I think that should be determined right at the outset, how much you want to do and how much you want the experts.
Could you describe something about how this gets negotiated?
Well, at the college level, we had our search committee appointed, and then we decided on the experts we wanted, and then we told them what we wanted. They told us what they could do, their package of services, and we told them which of the ones we wanted. And the services we wanted was for them to give us the names of people who might not apply for the job, but who would be good for the job, and might not even know themselves that they were interested in moving, but whom the experts thought would be excellent to fulfill our criteria, to give us those names. And then from there, we determined ourselves, we would contact them and find out whether they were interested. In addition to that, when we came down to the finalists, the 4, 5, or 6, in this case it was only 3, we asked the experts anonymously to go to the home area of each candidate and find out what that person was thought of in his or her community, what the reputation was, what the sense of ability was. This was very helpful.
There's an enormous investment goes into this process of finding an executive, isn't it?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And there's a little luck in it.
And what?
There's a little luck in it, too.
A little luck. Well, you apparently found very good executives for the agencies that you were affiliated with, and were very pleased with the way that they turned out.
That's right.
Uh-huh. You mentioned George Nishinaka. You mentioned Chet Latch.
And the one at the Legal Aid Foundation, Charles Jones.
Charles Jones.
And then I've also been involved in college president searches. And I've been very pleased with that.
Well, these 3 who were quite outstanding were really local people, and that was in a time before these quite elaborate
Rick
searches
Stock
were
was
made.
not local. He came from the Midwest. And Charles Jones may have come from Northern California. And Chet Latch, I don't remember where he came from.
I think he was one of our USC alumni.
He was,
and,
that's
and
right.
George
I think
was
he was.
as well. Yes.
Well, John Miller was on the board of the Special Service for Groups for years.
Do you keep in touch with these agencies currently?
Some. I'm not really active in any of them anymore. I was so involved for so long that I kind of believe in the principle of rotation. And once 9 years or 7 or 8 years, I think it's time for new blood. But I give them slight support. And Latch, of course, has died now, so that my connection with Hathaway is not personal anymore. There are very few people.
Do they come to you as kind of an elder statesman from time to time?
They did for a while.
What kind of help do they look for when they do that?
Oh, I think it's usually be connected with fundraising, or it can be connected with searches or program.
When you were succeeded by someone else as president, did they turn to you for how you'd handled something?
Yeah. It kind of dwindles off.
When a new person gets the legs
They
and
want to make their own decisions. And usually a pretty clean cutoff.
Yeah. Have you, as you look back, seen much difference in the way a family service agency, for example, operates?
No, I think it's very much the same.
It operates pretty much the same as when you were there, and would
They
you
have
say
more branches, I think, now.
Would you say the same for an agency like Hathaway, that's pretty much the same as when you were affiliated with it? Its program has stayed.
The one thing that's different is they have now some outpatient services, which they didn't have before. The people can come in.
What are those outpatient services?
Well, I think it's with people with emotional problems can come in and not necessarily be a resident. Village.
they work with children in their own homes?
Well, they work with them when they come for... I really shouldn't be talking about it because I'm not cued in. I just know they have some outpatients.
Which they didn't in the beginning. It was only the institutional program.
Yeah.
Change. You mentioned some of the things that were important, being search committees and getting more adequate funding. Can you think of any other things that stand out that are kind of triumphs?
Well, I think long-range planning for an agency.
Can you give an example of that?
Well, Hathaway Home was when they started the Children's Village. It used to be over here on Avenue 64, and then they moved to a new area, and at that point it was important to look ahead for the next 5 years.
You had kind of a 5-year plan.
Yeah, and determine what you needed, and what it was going to cost, and how you're going to raise it, and what kind of staff you're going to need. And I think it's a good thing for most organizations to look ahead. I think 10 years can scare you too much.
Well, did you have these kind of 5-year plans in some of the other agencies in addition to Hathaway?
To tell you the truth, I can't remember.
But you gave such a succinct statement of what the plan was, what the program would be, and what it would cost, and how you would meet the cost, and what staff you would need. And this was really kind of a blueprint then for the immediate future?
Right. Well, plans, the long-range plans are very often not followed, and that's okay too. You can't have them written in cement. But one problem with this is when you start adding up costs, you can get kind of frightened as to whether you're going to be in business 5 years down the road. But somehow it all you always manage. But sometimes you have to cut service.
And just recently there's been such an escalation in cost, and per diem cost for care of a child and all that.
I know. Everything. We recently, this is off the subject a little, but I was talking just the other day, we've had some litigation at the college level of minority professors who didn't get tenure and have wanted to litigate the problem. And we had one instance in which the litigation was settled without going to court, but the attorney's fees charged the college for $300,000. And that's a tremendous escalation of cost.
A lot of money. One thing that interests me when you tell me how many agencies you're affiliated with and board president, that is an enormous drain on your personal time.
Yes.
And I know you were active in your profession as well. Could you tell us something about how you accommodated both of those things?
I was lucky in some ways. When my father died, I acquired some financial independence, and at that point I decided I would donate a third of my time.
A third of your time?
To community service.
It's remarkable. Because most people are not able to do that.
I know.
Yes.
Well, I was lucky enough to do it and decided that's what I wanted to do. So it was a deliberate decision. But sometimes it was more than a third.
Did you have that on a certain schedule, or?
Well, for the legal part, you keep timesheets. I didn't keep timesheets for the volunteer work, but I just knew.
But you limited your legal work to 2/3 of your working
But
time.
sometimes the volunteer, I just get so interested I'd spend more time.
It would kind of spill over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they were marvelous experiences. You know, you get more than you give.